Inventables have sent me an X-Carve for free in return for an honest review. This is the second time they've sent me an X-Carve. They sent the original X-Carve back in 2015. So what's changed? This is essentially version 2 of the X-Carve, or if you're a Nintendo or Apple, this would be the new X-Carve. Inventables just refer to it as the X-Carve, with the old version being the X-Carve 2015. They sent the 750mm model, the X controller, the Z probe, DeWalt router as the spindle, homing switches, and the new dust control system that was released in April. It's not a revolutionary design, but evolutionary. Basically, the primary three sources of frustration are at least addressed a little. No more crappy quiet cut spindle, the X-axis is much stiffer, and the X controller provides much more power and features over the previous G-Shield. Now, some people will believe me when I say this is an honest review, but if I say too many positive things, some people will call it BS. So let's get that out of the way and start with a few bad points. And I mean bad, really bad, almost made me send the machine back level bad. The assembly instructions. The instructions start off okay, but they get worse as you go further along, almost as if they had been written by one person in one day and they were getting tired. While everything is packaged really well and individually labelled, having a 7-digit code to find parts gets pretty tiring. Don't you hate it when you pick up 25285-44 instead of 25288-86-44? There are fewer parts than the old X-Carve, and you no longer have to tap any aluminium, and you don't have to do any wiring. They've all got plug-in connectors. Those are wins. What isn't a win is when the instructions are wrong. I can certainly forgive typos in words, that's not a big deal, but it is a big deal when it tells you to wire up the Y2 motor twice. But one of those should have been the Y1 motor, and you start doubting yourself. It isn't a win when you've read the written instructions, look at the photos, and follow along with the 3D rendering and realise they all contradict each other. It isn't a win when the instructions for the 1000mm machine have been pasted into the 750mm machine, so you're looking for the 5 clips that the instructions tell you to use when your machine only has 4. The general layout of the instructions is improved, yes, but the optional extras are treated as upgrades, so you have to go back after assembly, take some bolts out, then insert the new components. I realise not everybody is going to get all the upgrades, people want to go their own path, but make the instructions choose your own adventure style. R.L. Stein figured that one out. In the first X-Carve instructions there were videos for all the steps. They got rid of that. I totally get video costs time and money, but there is motion in the machine and static photos. The two don't mesh all that well. Once you're done assembling, the instructions just kind of tell you to have at it. They give up. The old instructions had a 3.5-minute video of tuning the machine. Go watch that, particularly for the V-wheel positioning and belt tension. Inventables really need to shake down their hardware supplier too. I'm not talking about the fabricated parts, but the nuts and bolts. A handful of nuts couldn't be used at all. Luckily there were spares. A few were damaged but still usable with brute force. The vertical mount T-nuts are really cool with the spring-loaded ball to keep them in position, except for the one that didn't have the ball at all. I'm sure they would have been replaced if I contacted support, but that has a real time cost when assembling the machine. While the drag chain is a must for a tidy environment, I've never met a more spiteful piece of plastic. What appears jokingly, the instructions say clipping together the drag chain is probably the hardest bit of the assembly. It is. After interpreting the incorrect instructions, those bloody plastic clips cost me almost half an hour each. The design for these suck. They're user hostile. They require enough torque to bend some of the thin aluminium brackets. Luckily, those brackets don't actually affect the machine operation, but it's frightening how much force must be applied. Weirdly, I have a bunch of spare parts. I'm not sure why I have a spare terminal block, or more confusingly, a packet of lubricant that isn't mentioned anywhere. Bolts I understand, but a terminal block makes me think I've missed something. I really didn't enjoy the assembly and got very close to packing it up and returning it to Inventables. Before I get onto the actual machine, let's cover Easel. Easel is Inventables' CAD/CAM machine operation web-based software. It's not required for the X-Carve, though initial setup is recommended through it. Easel is free. For 2.5D CAD, it's okay. For machine operation, it's actually pretty good, and I appreciate the user-friendly workflow of actually starting up the machine, something programs like Universal G-Code Sender could benefit from. However, Easel's cam section, while functional, is not great. You still have very few options and no options for drilling, and unfortunately still no options for V-carving. Toolpaths that it generates are a bit funny. The biggest offender, however, is the stock feeds and speeds. I think that's one of the things that led to the initial frustration of many with this machine. MDF is one of the few materials in there that approaches a sane feed rate, and even then it's too slow. Switch to birch and you're down to 760mm a minute with a tiny 0.7mm depth per pass. It's just a simple lookup table. There's no sort of feed and speed calculator based on the bit size or motor power. The machine operation part of it is good though, and since I last looked at it, Easel has come a long way with the ability to export G-code, but more importantly import G-code from things like Fusion 360 and send it to the machine that way. As I said though, Easel isn't required. You can use something like Fusion 360 for full control of CAD and CAM, export that, then use Universal G-code sender, or these days, as I said, Easel will import that G-code. What about the other bits and pieces? The new clamps are fantastic. The old ones were kind of janky hardwood and multiple bolts, and these are just so much better. They're aluminium and I guess 3D printed parts, and they work fantastic. I'd probably skip the calipers they sell. They're fine, but they're nothing special. They're generic hardened steel digital calipers. Fine for woodworking, but not really for machining like this. I believe iGaging's Origin Cal are the least expensive option that rivals Mitutoyo's lower end. And then there is the dust collection. It looks a lot like the Sucket dust boot because the Sucket inventor had a part building it and gets a commission on it. If you're ordering an X-Carve, personally, I think this should be a requirement. It works so well. I've been cutting out a lot of MDF and I've had no cleanup whatsoever to do. Apart from being better for your lungs, it keeps crap off the rail so you're not going to lose steps from dust. I have nothing but good words to say about the dust collection as it just works so well. Removing the dust improves the cut quality, improves accuracy by not clogging the belts, and it doesn't try to kill you. There's lots of wins there. So what about the actual machine? There is a lot to like over the first X-Carve. The stiffer gantry is good and you shouldn't need to do any of the stiffening mods on the larger machines now. The X controller is way neater and simply better. It looks better, has better power management, there's an e-stop button, a play pause button on the front of the machine. It also enables the Z probe, which I also highly recommend. While the connector for the Z probe is a little bit stiff, once plugged in it just works. No more futzing around with paper and manually jogging the Z axis. They've abandoned the quiet cut spindle and the DeWalt trim router is now the default option. While it is louder, it actually has proper bearings and a real size drive shaft and gives noticeably better results right off the bat. More power and a much more rigid motor. Out of the box with no calibration because I'm not 100% sure where to start, I'm within 0.3mm on the X and Y axis while the Z axis is within the error margin on my calipers. In theory, with some proper tuning, it can be almost a magnitude more accurate, and that's with feed rates about double what the quiet cut spindle could cope with. This particular size machine is new, the 750mm gantry pieces. It allows a 500mm cut area. For me and the things I'm likely to do, the 1m machine is just a little bit too big of a footprint, while the 500mm machine had just a little bit too small of a cutting area. It really depends on what you think you're going to do with it. So what am I going to do with it? Remember that power carving I did on the T-tray a few weeks ago? I'm going to be extending that to panels on 2 desks we'll be building shortly. With 4 panels per desk, that adds up to a crazy amount of little carvings. Or I just set the X-Carve to go. You've already seen me use it in a few recent videos for exact size holes for template for dust fittings. I can see a lot of templates being made using on the X-Carve, then taking it over to a 2 or 3 horsepower router to get the job done. It's not that the X-Carve couldn't eventually get them done, but it is all about improving efficiency. There are other projects like this prototype dice tray I'm working on for a friend that I could probably do by hand, but it would be a massive pain in the rear end to prototype out 7 slots that vary by just a few millimeters each for each of the different dice size. So how does this compare with the market? I'm not super interested in designing my own CNC. I'm not super interested in electronics because I have enough on my plate as it is. You can build more rigid machines that don't use GT belting, probably for the ballpark figure of the same price range. And if that's your cup of tea, go for it. For me, a CNC is just a tool, not a project in itself. I absolutely get why people would want to go that way, but it's not for me. Alternatively, you could buy much more expensive kits that use rack and pinion for linear motion. And yeah, they'll be better, but for the same work area, you might be talking 2 to 5 times the price, and that's at the low end. Overall, there are good and bad. Most of the bad is left behind after the assembly, and this machine just works much better than it did in the past. It certainly won't be replacing my current style of work or videos, but there is a lot of practical uses to enhance my work I can already see. The wife already has eyed off a lot of acrylics and aluminiums for jewellery making. Let me know if there is interest in my CNC adventures. As I said, it won't be replacing existing content, but perhaps in addition to or even on another channel. Thank you for watching.